You open your eyes to another morning. The alarm screams its familiar mechanical demand at the same time it has for months, perhaps years. Your feet hit the cold floor in the same practiced rhythm they have followed through countless identical morning's coffee brewing in the same mug. The shower is running at the same temperature. The commute follows the same route to the same destination, where you'll perform the same tasks with the same people before returning home to the same evening routine of dinner, screen time, and eventual sleep. But here's the question that should terrify you more than any horror movie, more than any existential crisis, more than any midlife awakening. When did you last feel truly, genuinely awake during this entire sequence? When did you last pause in the middle of this choreographed dance and think with full awareness, I am choosing this moment. I am creating this experience. This is my life happening right now. The brutal truth is that most of us drift through our days like sleepwalkers in a carefully choreographed dream, one where someone else wrote the script. We often mistake constant motion for meaningful progress, endless busyness for genuine purpose, and a comfortable routine for authentic living. But there exists a profound difference between merely existing and truly being alive. One is passive acceptance. The other is active creation. The ancient Greeks possessed a concept they called kairos, not chronological time measured by clocks and calendars, but the right or opportune moment for something meaningful to occur. It represents qualitative time rather than quantitative time. The moment when you suddenly realize, with shocking clarity, that you've been asleep at the wheel of your existence. That realization isn't comfortable or pleasant. It's jarring, deeply unsettling, sometimes genuinely painful. But it's also the first crucial step toward authentic freedom. Consider your last week with unflinching honesty. How many decisions did you make from conscious deliberation versus automatic response? How often did you act from genuine inner desire versus inherited habit or external expectation? If you're brutally honest, really, truly honest with yourself, you might discover that you've been living on what philosophers call existential cruise control for longer than you'd care to admit. This isn't merely about productivity optimization or self-improvement in the conventional sense. This cuts far deeper than morning routines or goal-setting strategies. This is about something fundamentally more important. The recognition that you are not a passive passenger riding along in your existence. You are simultaneously the driver, the navigator, and the one ultimately responsible for choosing both the destination and the journey itself. The numbness creeps in so gradually that we often don't notice its arrival. Days begin blending into indistinguishable weeks. Weeks merge into forgettable months. Before we realize what's happened, entire years have passed in a haze of unconscious repetition. We wake up one day feeling like strangers in our own lives, wondering how we arrived at this particular place, with these particular people, doing these particular things that we never consciously chose. But recognition is the beginning of transformation. Awareness creates the possibility of different choices, and different choices made consistently over time create different lives. The question becomes, are you ready to wake up from the comfortable sleep of routine and begin the sometimes uncomfortable work of conscious living? Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher who became synonymous with existentialist thought, made an observation that initially sounds paradoxical. Humans are condemned to be free. At first encounter, this seems contradictory. How can freedom possibly be a condemnation? Isn't freedom precisely what people fight wars to achieve, what they sacrifice everything to obtain? The answer lies in understanding what existential freedom truly means. which goes far beyond political or social liberty. Sartre was pointing to something much more fundamental and, frankly, more terrifying: the inescapable reality that you cannot avoid the burden of choice, even when you desperately want to. Even refusing to choose is itself a choice. Even following others blindly without question is a choice. Even living unconsciously and automatically is a choice. Even claiming that you have no options is a choice to see your situation in that particular way. This reality can feel overwhelming because it systematically strips away all our comfortable excuses and places the full weight of responsibility squarely and unavoidably on our own shoulders. Think carefully about the decisions you've been avoiding lately, the career change you've been postponing for practical reasons, the relationship conversation you've been sidestepping because it might be uncomfortable, the creative project that's been gathering dust in your mind because you're waiting for the right time, the travel plans you keep delaying until you have enough money or enough time. Each postponement represents a choice to remain exactly where you are. Each delay constitutes a decision to let precious time pass without deliberate, intentional action. The existentialists understood something that our comfort-seeking culture often tries to deny. Authenticity isn't about discovering your true self as if it were buried treasure waiting to be unearthed with the right map or technique. Instead, authenticity emerges through the ongoing process of creating yourself through conscious choices, moment by moment, decision by decision, response by response. This process isn't comfortable or convenient. It requires acknowledging that your life, as it exists today, is largely the accumulated result of choices you've made or consciously avoided making. That recognition can sting deeply. It forces you to confront the ways you've surrendered your agency to habit, to others' expectations, to fear of uncertainty or discomfort. But here's the liberating flip side of this uncomfortable truth. If your current life is the result of your choices, then your future life can be dramatically different based on new choices you begin making, starting right now in this very moment. Consider the profound difference between someone who says, "I have to work this job," and someone who says, "I choose to work this job for now because it serves my current priorities and values." The external situation appears identical to any observer, but the internal experience is radically, fundamentally different. One person experiences themselves as trapped, victimized by circumstances beyond their control. The other recognizes their agency and maintains their sense of personal power even within constraints. The existentialist invitation isn't to make dramatic, life-altering changes overnight, or to abandon all stability and responsibility. Instead, it's to begin recognizing the countless micro-choices that shape your daily experience. The choice is to scroll mindlessly through social media, or to read something that enriches your understanding. The choice is to complain about your circumstances, or to accept them while working toward change. The choice to avoid difficult conversations, or to engage them with courage and honesty. Each of these seemingly small choices accumulates over time into the larger architecture of your life. And once you begin to see them clearly, to recognize them as genuine choices rather than inevitable responses, you can begin to choose more deliberately and consciously. Freedom, in the existentialist sense, isn't the absence of constraints. It's the recognition that even within constraints, you retain the power to choose your response. And that power, once recognized and exercised consciously, becomes the foundation of authentic living. How do you recognize when you've been sleepwalking through your existence? The symptoms are often subtle and gradual, like a slow leak in a tire that you don't notice until the entire vehicle feels different to drive. By the time you recognize the problem, you may have been running on empty for longer than you realized. One of the clearest indicators is what we might call time compression, the phenomenon where days blend seamlessly into weeks, weeks merge into months, until you find yourself genuinely asking, where did this entire year disappear to? When you're living consciously and deliberately, time has texture and dimension. You remember specific conversations that mattered. You recall moments of unexpected beauty or insight. You can identify instances of personal growth or meaningful connection. But when you're operating on autopilot, time becomes a featureless blur, like driving through fog where every mile looks identical to the last. You reach the end of a day, a week, or even a month with little clear recollection of what actually happened or how you spent those irreplaceable hours. Another telltale sign is emotional flattening or numbness. This isn't clinical depression exactly, though it may share some characteristics. It's more like a muting of the full spectrum of human feeling. Joy feels dulled and distant. Even sadness lacks its proper depth and clarity. You're not fully present to your own emotional life because you're not fully present to your life at all. Pay careful attention to your relationship with technology and media consumption. Are you reaching for your phone out of genuine interest in connecting with others or learning something valuable? Or are you grabbing it automatically to fill any moment of silence or potential boredom? Are you consuming content that genuinely enriches your understanding of the world? Or are you simply passing time with whatever happens to appear in your feed? The quality of your attention reveals the quality of your presence. When you're living consciously, you choose your inputs deliberately. When you're on autopilot, you consume whatever is most immediately available or entertaining. Notice the depth and authenticity of your conversations. Are you truly listening when others speak, engaging with genuine curiosity about their experiences and perspectives? Or are you simply waiting for your turn to speak, planning what you'll say next while they're still talking? Are you sharing thoughts and feelings that actually matter to you? Or are you performing a carefully crafted version of yourself that you think others want to see? Authentic engagement requires showing up as you actually are, complete with uncertainties, struggles, and imperfections, rather than as a polished persona designed to impress or avoid conflict. Examine your physical relationship with the immediate world around you. When did you last truly notice the way morning light falls across your workspace? What is the specific texture of the air on your skin when you step outside? The precise, unique flavor of your coffee or tea, rather than just consuming it as fuel. Unconscious living systematically disconnects us from sensory richness, reducing life to a series of abstract tasks to complete, rather than experiences to savor. Perhaps most revealing of all, look honestly at your relationship with your own dreams, aspirations, and deepest desires. Have they become vague, someday fantasies that you occasionally entertain but never seriously pursue? Do they feel like pleasant fiction rather than living possibilities that deserve your actual time and energy? When we're sleepwalking through life, we often treat our most authentic desires like entertainment is nice to think about during idle moments, but not serious enough to warrant real action or sacrifice. We postpone the writing project, the business idea, the relationship we really want, the place we'd love to live, the skill we'd love to develop. We tell ourselves we'll get to these things when we have more time, more money, more confidence, more certainty about the outcome. But here's what unconscious living doesn't want you to realize. There will never be a perfect time for the things that matter most. Certainty about outcomes is rarely available before you begin. The time, money, and confidence you're waiting for often emerge through the process of taking action, not before it. The good news is that recognizing these patterns represents the crucial first step toward changing them. Awareness creates the space for different choices, and choice, exercised consciously and consistently, is the foundation of an examined, intentional life. You don't need to transform everything overnight. You just need to begin paying attention to the difference between conscious and unconscious living. Start noticing when you're truly present versus when you're going through the motions. Begin distinguishing between choices that align with your values and choices that simply follow the path of least resistance. This awareness, cultivated over time, becomes the foundation for a life lived with intention rather than habit, purpose rather than mere productivity, presence rather than perpetual distraction. There exists a practice that the ancient Stoic philosophers called memento mori, remember that you will die. To modern ears, this might sound morbid, depressing, or unnecessarily dark. But the Stoics weren't trying to create despair or anxiety. They were offering one of the most clarifying and life-affirming practices imaginable. When you truly absorb the reality of your finite existence, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived truth that applies to you personally, priorities become crystal clear with startling immediacy. The petty concerns that typically consume vast amounts of mental energy suddenly seem insignificant. The social dramas that usually feel so important reveal themselves as temporary distractions. The risks you've been avoiding seem far less frightening than the ultimate risk of never taking them at all. Imagine, for just a moment, receiving definitive news that you had exactly 1 year left to live, not in a state of physical decline or debilitating illness, but 1 full year of complete vitality and health. How would that knowledge change your choices starting tomorrow morning? What activities would you immediately stop engaging in? What conversations would you finally have? What experiences would suddenly become non-negotiable priorities? More importantly, what does your honest answer to these questions reveal about how you're currently choosing to spend your time and energy? The brutal honesty required by this thought experiment reveals how much of our current living operates from assumptions of unlimited time. We postpone difficult conversations, assuming we'll have countless future opportunities to address important issues. We delay pursuing meaningful work, believing we can always switch careers someday when conditions are more favourable. We put off telling people we love them, as if these words will carry the same power whenever we finally get around to expressing them. We live as if we were immortal, while simultaneously worrying about trivial inconveniences as if they were matters of life and death. This fundamental misalignment between our daily concerns and our ultimate reality creates much of the anxiety and dissatisfaction that characterizes modern life. But here's the uncomfortable truth that our death-denying culture works hard to help us avoid. You don't have unlimited time. None of us does. The months, years, or perhaps decades you have remaining represent all the time you'll ever get to create meaning, to love deeply, to contribute something valuable to the world, to become the person you're capable of being. This awareness doesn't have to lead to panic, desperate urgency, or reckless abandon. Instead, it can lead to what we might call gentle prioritization, a consistent, persistent focus on what truly matters rather than what merely seems urgent or convenient. Death, properly understood, isn't the opposite of life. It's life's most honest and reliable advisor. It whispers constantly, if we're willing to listen, "This moment matters more than you realize." This choice carries more weight than you think. This conversation might be more important than you know. Don't wait for better circumstances or greater certainty. Don't wait at all. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger wrote extensively about what he called being toward death as a fundamental aspect of authentic human existence. He argued that when we live with genuine, conscious awareness of our mortality, we stop hiding from ourselves and from the reality of our situation. We stop pretending that trivial concerns are profound and that profound concerns can be safely ignored. We begin making choices based on what matters to us deeply, rather than what appears safe or socially acceptable. We start investing our limited time and energy in alignment with our actual values, rather than our inherited expectations or cultural programming. Consider how differently you might approach each day if you began every morning with a moment of quiet, honest acknowledgement. I am alive today. This is not guaranteed for tomorrow. This day is an irreplaceable gift. How do I want to use this unrepeatable opportunity? This isn't about becoming morbid or obsessed with death. It's about using mortality as a lens that brings life into sharper focus. When you remember that your time is limited, you become more selective about how you spend it. When you recognize that your relationships are temporary, you invest in them more deeply. When you understand that your opportunities are finite, you become more willing to take meaningful risks. The awareness of death, integrated wisely into daily life, doesn't diminish your experience, it intensifies it. It transforms ordinary moments into occasions for gratitude. It makes authentic expression feel urgent and important. It helps you distinguish between what deserves your attention and what merely demands it. Most people spend enormous amounts of energy trying to avoid thinking about death, but this avoidance often leads to avoiding life as well. When you make peace with mortality, you can finally make the most of whatever time remains. Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, often considered the father of existentialism, issued a profound warning about what he called the crowd. He wasn't referring merely to literal crowds of people, but to the powerful psychological pressure to conform, to blend seamlessly into accepted patterns, to avoid the profound discomfort that comes with individual responsibility and authentic self-expression. Living authentically often means living differently from those around you. This doesn't mean being contrarian for its own sake, or rejecting others' wisdom simply because it's widely accepted. Instead, it means being willing to make choices that genuinely align with your deepest values and authentic nature, even when those choices don't align with popular opinion, social expectations, or family traditions. The pressure to conform operates at levels so subtle and pervasive that we often don't recognize its influence on our decisions. We unconsciously choose careers based partly on what sounds impressive or respectable at social gatherings. We form and express opinions based more on what seems socially acceptable or politically safe than on what we actually believe after careful independent consideration. We gradually shape our personalities, interests, and even our dreams to fit into whatever group we're trying to join or maintain membership within. Over time, this pattern of small compromises can lead to a profound disconnection from our authentic selves. We become increasingly skilled at being who others want us to be, but we may lose touch with who we actually are beneath all the performance and accommodation. This creates what Kierkegaard identified as a particular kind of spiritual anxiety, not the anxiety of facing a specific external challenge, but the diffuse, persistent anxiety of living consistently misaligned with our own nature. It's the deep discomfort of constantly performing, rather than simply being, of always managing impressions rather than expressing truth. The alternative requires what Kierkegaard called a leap of faith, not necessarily religious faith, though it might include that, but faith in your own fundamental worth and judgment. Faith that it's ultimately better to be disliked or misunderstood for who you actually are than to be praised and accepted for who you're pretending to be. Faith that your authentic voice and perspective matter, even if they sometimes speak into apparent silence or indifference. This kind of authenticity doesn't mean rejecting all social connections, community input, or collective wisdom. Healthy relationships and communities actually support and encourage authentic expression rather than demanding conformity to external standards. But it does mean being willing to stand alone when your conscience, values, or deep inner knowing require it. The price of this authenticity includes occasional loneliness, misunderstanding, criticism, and the anxiety that comes with taking responsibility for your own choices rather than following predetermined paths. These costs are real and shouldn't be minimized or romanticized. But the rewards are profound. The quiet satisfaction of knowing that your life genuinely belongs to you, that your choices emerge from your own considered judgment rather than from fear of disapproval or desperate need for acceptance. The deep peace that comes from expressing your authentic self in the world, regardless of others' reactions. The creative energy that becomes available when you stop spending so much effort managing how others perceive you. Friedrich Nietzsche expanded on this theme with his concept of what he called herd mentality, the tendency for people to follow collective patterns and inherited values without questioning whether these patterns serve their individual growth and authentic expression. He observed that while following the herd might keep people safe and socially accepted, it also keeps them small, preventing them from discovering and developing their unique gifts and perspectives. Breaking free from herd mentality doesn't make you superior to others or exempt from social responsibility. Instead, it makes you responsible for creating your own meaning, developing your own values, and contributing your own unique voice to the human conversation rather than simply echoing what you've inherited from your culture, family, or peer group. This process of individual development often requires periods of solitude, reflection, and what might feel like exile from conventional social patterns. But these periods of apparent separation can be extraordinarily fertile, allowing space for your authentic self to emerge without constant pressure to conform to others' expectations. The goal isn't to become isolated or antisocial, but to develop a strong enough sense of your own identity and values that you can engage authentically with others, rather than merely reflecting back what you think they want to see. When you know who you are and what you stand for, you can connect with others from a place of genuine strength rather than desperate need for approval. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, psychiatrist, and profound observer of human nature, made a remarkable discovery during his time in Nazi concentration camps. He noticed that those who managed to survive the unimaginable horrors weren't necessarily the physically strongest or most privileged, but often those who maintained some sense of purpose, meaning, or reason to continue living even in the most desperate circumstances imaginable. This observation led him to develop logotherapy, a therapeutic approach based on the revolutionary idea that the primary human drive isn't pleasure, as Freud suggested, or power, as Adler proposed, but meaning. And perhaps most importantly, Frankl discovered that meaning often emerges through struggle rather than despite it, through conscious engagement with difficulty rather than through its avoidance. This insight directly challenges our contemporary culture's obsession with comfort, convenience, and the elimination of all forms of difficulty or discomfort. We live in an era of unprecedented technological advancement designed to make life easier, more predictable, and less demanding. We're constantly trying to optimize our way out of difficulty, to hack our way to happiness, to find shortcuts and life hacks that will deliver fulfillment without the messiness of genuine struggle. But what if this entire approach is fundamentally misguided? What if struggle itself, the right kind of struggle, consciously chosen and purposefully engaged, represents an essential ingredient in a meaningful life rather than an obstacle to be overcome? Consider the crucial difference between suffering that diminishes us and suffering that expands our capacity for wisdom, compassion, and authentic strength. Suffering that comes from living unconsciously, remaining trapped in situations that drain our vitality, avoiding necessary changes out of fear or convenience, numbing ourselves with distractions rather than facing difficult truths. In this kind of suffering tends to be largely pointless. It doesn't teach us anything valuable, doesn't make us stronger or wiser, and doesn't connect us more deeply to our own humanity or to others. But suffering that emerges from growth, the discomfort of learning challenging new skills, the vulnerability required for honest communication, the uncertainty that accompanies pursuing meaningful but risky goals, for this kind of suffering can be genuinely transformative. It builds character, clarifies values, develops resilience, and connects us more deeply to what it means to be human. The crucial insight is learning to choose your struggles consciously rather than simply accepting whatever difficulties happen to arise. Instead of asking, "How can I avoid all forms of difficulty and discomfort?" the question becomes, what difficulty is worth embracing because it leads towards something I genuinely value? This might mean choosing the discomfort and uncertainty of starting a creative practice over the numbness and regret of endless entertainment consumption. It might mean choosing the anxiety and vulnerability of having difficult but necessary conversations over the resentment and disconnection that comes from avoiding them. It might mean choosing the financial uncertainty of pursuing meaningful work over the security but spiritual death of a job that slowly drains your life force. Frankl observed something profound. People can endure almost any hardship if they believe it serves a purpose larger than their immediate comfort or convenience. The question becomes, what purpose is compelling enough to make your current struggles feel worthwhile? What vision of who you could become or what you could contribute makes present difficulties seem like investments rather than punishments? This isn't about glorifying hardship, seeking out unnecessary pain, or believing that suffering is inherently noble. It's about recognizing that a life worth living often requires us to lean into discomfort rather than constantly trying to escape from it. It's about understanding that the things we value most, deep relationships, creative expression, personal growth, meaningful contribution, all require effort, risk, and the willingness to be uncomfortable. When you reframe challenges as opportunities to become who you're meant to be, rather than obstacles preventing you from getting what you want, everything shifts. The struggle becomes sacred rather than pointless. The difficulty becomes meaningful rather than merely unpleasant. And meaning, as Frankl discovered through the most extreme circumstances imaginable, makes almost anything bearable and worthwhile. The key is discernment, learning to distinguish between struggles that move you towards something valuable and struggles that simply keep you stuck in patterns that don't serve your growth or authentic expression. This requires honest self-reflection about your deepest values and genuine priorities, as well as the courage to make changes when you recognize that your current struggles aren't leading anywhere meaningful. Understanding these philosophical concepts intellectually represents only the beginning of transformation. The crucial gap between insight and actual change is where most good intentions and noble aspirations go to die. The challenge isn't learning about conscious living, it's consistently practicing it in the midst of daily demands, social pressures, and ingrained habits. The key insight is that consciousness isn't a destination you reach once and then maintain effortlessly forever. It's an ongoing practice that requires daily recommitment, like physical fitness or musical skill. You don't become conscious and stay that way automatically. You choose consciousness repeatedly, moment by moment, decision by decision. Begin with what we might call existential journaling, a practice that goes far beyond recording daily events or expressing frustrations. This involves regular written reflection on the questions that cut to the heart of authentic living. What did I choose today consciously? And what did I choose unconsciously? When did I feel most alive, present, and genuinely myself? What did I avoid doing or feeling? And what fears or habits drove that avoidance? If today had been my final day on earth, what would I want to remember about how I lived it? The transformative power of these questions doesn't lie in finding perfect answers immediately. Instead, it lies in training your mind to notice the crucial distinction between conscious and unconscious living. Over time, this awareness becomes increasingly automatic, and you naturally begin making different choices without having to force or struggle against old patterns. Develop a practice of what might be called intentional routine disruption. Your autopilot patterns are deeply grooved neural pathways that operate beneath conscious awareness. To create new pathways and possibilities, you need to deliberately interrupt the old ones with enough frequency that consciousness has space to emerge. This can be as simple as taking a completely different route to work and paying attention to what you notice along the way. It might involve eating lunch somewhere new and striking up a conversation with someone you wouldn't normally interact with. Perhaps it means spending one evening per week without any screens or digital entertainment, simply sitting with your own thoughts or engaging in activities that require present moment attention. The goal isn't to make your life chaotic or unstable, but to inject enough novelty and unpredictability that your mind has to engage consciously rather than running purely on automatic responses. When you disrupt familiar patterns intentionally, you create openings for new choices, insights, and possibilities to emerge. Cultivate what we might call mindful mortality meditation, a regular practice of contemplating the temporary nature of your current experience. This doesn't require formal meditation training, special equipment, or lengthy time commitments. Simply spend a few minutes each day reflecting consciously on the fact that your current job, relationships, living situation, and even this particular phase of life won't last forever. Let this awareness of impermanence inform your choices without overwhelming you with urgency or anxiety. When you remember that nothing lasts forever, you naturally begin prioritizing what matters most and worrying less about things that are ultimately trivial or beyond your control. Create regular values alignment check-ins, scheduled times, weekly or monthly, when you honestly assess whether your actual behavior aligns with what you claim to value most. Are you spending time and energy on activities that genuinely matter to you, or on what you think should matter based on others' expectations? Are your daily choices moving you toward the person you want to become, or simply maintaining your current patterns out of habit? This isn't about harsh self-judgment or perfectionism, but about gentle course correction based on honest self-awareness. When you notice misalignment between values and actions, you can make adjustments without drama or self-criticism. Practice authentic expression in gradually expanding doses. Instead of always agreeing or staying silent to avoid conflict, occasionally share your actual opinion about something that matters to you. Instead of hiding your struggles and uncertainties to maintain a perfect image, let trusted people see you as you really are, complete with doubts, fears, and imperfections. Instead of pursuing goals that look impressive from the outside, spend time and energy on projects that feel genuinely meaningful from the inside. Start small with low-stakes situations, then gradually expand your comfort zone as you build confidence in your ability to handle others' reactions to your authentic self. The goal isn't to become selfish or inconsiderate, but to develop the capacity for genuine self-expression alongside appropriate consideration for others. Develop what might be called conscious consumption habits regarding information, entertainment, and social media. Instead of mindlessly consuming whatever content happens to appear in your feeds or recommendations, make deliberate choices about what you allow into your mental and emotional space. Ask yourself regularly, is this content enriching my understanding, inspiring positive action, or connecting me meaningfully with others? Or is it simply filling time, feeding anxiety, or encouraging comparison and dissatisfaction? Begin choosing quality over quantity, depth over superficial stimulation. Create regular periods of genuine solitude, time spent alone without external entertainment, information input, or social interaction. Use these periods to reconnect with your own thoughts, feelings, and desires without the influence of others' opinions or expectations. Many people discover that they've lost touch with their authentic preferences and inclinations because they're constantly responding to external input rather than checking in with their internal compass. These practices work cumulatively rather than dramatically. You don't transform overnight into a completely different person, but you gradually begin to feel more present, more intentional, more genuinely yourself. This feeling becomes its own motivation to continue growing and developing rather than settling for unconscious patterns. The most important thing to remember is that this is a practice, not a performance. There will be days when you slip back into autopilot, when you catch yourself going through familiar motions, when you realize you've been avoiding difficult truths or necessary changes. This isn't failure, it's simply being human. The measure of success isn't perfection, but your willingness to keep returning to consciousness when you notice you've drifted away from it. Every moment offers a fresh opportunity to choose awareness over unconsciousness, authenticity over performance, courage over comfort. Albert Camus wrote extensively about what he called the absurd, the fundamental disconnect between humanity's deep need for meaning and purpose and the universe's apparent indifference to that need. His response to this potentially devastating realization wasn't despair, cynicism, or nihilistic abandonment of all values. Instead, he proposed what might be called existential rebellion, the conscious decision to create meaning and live fully despite the absence of cosmic guarantees or universal validation. This kind of rebellion manifests not through dramatic public gestures or political activism, though it might include those elements, but through seemingly ordinary moments of authentic choice. It appears in the decision to have a genuine conversation instead of exchanging meaningless pleasantries. It emerges through the choice to pursue work that aligns with your values, rather than simply accepting whatever pays the highest salary. It expresses itself through the courage to love deeply and openly, despite the absolute certainty of eventual loss. Living authentically in a world that systematically rewards conformity, surface-level success, and avoiding difficult questions represents a quiet but profound form of revolution. Every time you choose truth over comfort, presence over distraction, vulnerability over self-protection, authentic expression over image management, you're participating in a rebellion against forces that would keep you small, unconscious, and safely predictable. This rebellion doesn't require dramatic gestures, public declarations, or abandoning all social responsibility. It happens primarily in the privacy of your own choices and the quality of your daily engagement with life. It occurs when you decide to feel your emotions fully instead of numbing them with work, entertainment, or substances. It manifests when you speak up for principles you believe in instead of staying silent to avoid potential conflict or disapproval. It appears when you pursue interests and activities that genuinely fascinate you, rather than what you think you should be interested in based on your age, gender, social position, or cultural background. It emerges through the decision to spend time with people who appreciate your authentic self, rather than those who only accept you when you're performing a role they find comfortable or convenient. The beautiful and paradoxical aspect of this kind of rebellion is that it's simultaneously deeply personal and inherently social. When you live more authentically, you naturally give others permission to do the same. Your courage becomes quietly contagious. Your willingness to be genuine creates space for others to drop their own masks and performances. Your presence becomes a gift not just to yourself, but to everyone who encounters you. But the primary beneficiary of your authentic living will always be you, not because authenticity guarantees happiness, success, or the absence of problems, but because it guarantees that whatever you experience, you're experiencing it fully as yourself, rather than as some carefully constructed performance of who you think you should be. Camus discovered that even in a potentially meaningless universe, the very act of living consciously, lovingly, and courageously is meaningful in itself. The meaning doesn't require external validation, cosmic approval, or guarantee of lasting impact. It emerges naturally from the quality of your engagement with your own existence and relationships. This represents perhaps the most radical insight of existential philosophy. You don't need anyone's permission to live fully and authentically. You don't need guarantees that everything will work out perfectly. You don't need to understand the ultimate purpose or meaning of existence before you can begin living meaningfully. You simply need to show up as yourself, make conscious choices based on your deepest values, and meet whatever arises with as much courage, compassion, and honesty as you can muster. The rebellion of authentic living is available to everyone, regardless of circumstances, background, or external constraints. It requires no special talents, advanced education, or extraordinary resources. It asks only for your willingness to wake up, pay attention, and choose consciously rather than automatically. Living consciously isn't a problem you solve once and then check off your list of life achievements. It's not a destination you reach and then maintain without effort. Instead, it represents an ongoing practice that you return to daily, sometimes moment by moment, throughout your entire life. There will inevitably be days when you slip back into familiar autopilot patterns, when you catch yourself going through practiced motions without awareness, when you realize you've been hiding from difficult truths or avoiding necessary changes. There will be periods when old fears reassert themselves, when social pressures feel overwhelming, when the comfort of unconscious living seems more appealing than the demands of authentic engagement. This isn't personal failure, character weakness, or evidence that you're not cut out for conscious living. This is simply what it means to be human, to exist in an ongoing tension between consciousness and unconsciousness, authenticity and performance, courage and fear. The philosopher William James wrote about what he called the sick soul, not referring to mental illness, but to the spiritual discomfort that arises from living misaligned with your deepest nature and values. This discomfort, properly understood, isn't a problem to be solved or eliminated, but a compass pointing consistently toward a more authentic way of being. When you feel that familiar restlessness, that persistent sense that something important is missing despite external success or social acceptance, that's your authentic self calling you back home to yourself. When you experience the anxiety that comes from being systematically misaligned with your own values, that's your conscience asking you to pay closer attention to the gap between who you are and how you're living. When you feel the emptiness that comes from going through familiar motions without genuine engagement, that's life itself inviting you to participate more fully rather than simply observing from a safe distance. These uncomfortable feelings aren't enemies to be defeated through distraction or positive thinking, but allies trying to guide you toward a richer, more authentic experience of being human. Learning to listen to them with curiosity rather than resistance represents a crucial skill for anyone committed to conscious living. The practice of becoming who you're meant to be requires what we might call compassionate persistence, the ability to keep showing up for your own growth and development without harsh self-judgment when you inevitably fall short of your ideals. It means treating yourself with the same kindness you would offer a good friend who was struggling with similar challenges. Remember that consciousness isn't a permanent high you achieve and then maintain effortlessly. It's more analogous to physical fitness. It requires ongoing attention, regular practice, and consistent effort. Some days you'll feel strong, clear, and fully present. Other days you'll feel tired, confused, and disconnected from your deeper values. Both experiences are normal parts of the human journey. What matters isn't achieving perfect consciousness or never falling back into unconscious patterns. What matters is your ongoing commitment to keep choosing awareness over unconsciousness, authenticity over performance, courage over comfort, when meaningful situations call for these choices. What matters is your willingness to keep becoming who you're meant to be, one conscious decision at a time. Perhaps the most accessible entry point into conscious living lies not in complex philosophical understanding or dramatic life changes, but in the simple practice of present moment awareness. This means learning to inhabit your current experience fully, rather than living primarily in memories of the past or fantasies about the future. Most of us spend remarkably little time actually present to what's happening right now. Our minds constantly drift to what we need to do later, what we should have done differently yesterday, how we wish circumstances were different, or how we hope they'll change in the future. This mental time travel, while sometimes useful for planning and learning, becomes problematic when it dominates our experience, to the point where we miss the actual life happening in front of us. Present moment awareness doesn't require special training, expensive equipment, or ideal circumstances. It simply requires the decision to pay attention to what's actually occurring in your immediate experience. The feeling of your feet touching the ground as you walk, the specific quality of light coming through your window right now, the particular rhythm and depth of your breathing in this moment, the exact taste and temperature of whatever you're drinking. This might sound trivial or overly simple, but there's profound depth in this simplicity. When you're fully present to your immediate experience, several important things happen simultaneously. First, anxiety about the future naturally diminishes, because anxiety exists only when your mind is projecting into uncertain scenarios that haven't happened yet. Second, Regret about the past loses its grip because regret can only exist when you're mentally dwelling on events that are already finished and can't be changed. Third, and perhaps most importantly, you begin to recognize that your actual life, not the story you tell about your life, but your lived experience itself, is always happening now. The past exists only in memory. The future exists only in imagination. But this moment, right here, is where your real life is always occurring. When you learn to anchor your attention in present experience, you gain access to resources and perspectives that aren't available when your mind is scattered across different time periods and hypothetical scenarios. You become more responsive and less reactive. You make decisions based on current reality rather than outdated fears or unrealistic expectations. You also begin to notice the extraordinary richness available in ordinary moments that you've been rushing past without recognition. The way sunlight transforms the appearance of familiar objects throughout the day. The subtle changes in your own energy and mood in response to different activities, people, and environments. The constant creativity of your own mind as it generates thoughts, images, and associations. Present moment awareness naturally leads to what might be called gratitude for what is, rather than constant focus on what's missing or wrong. This doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting unacceptable situations. Instead, it means recognizing and appreciating what's already available while you work toward meaningful changes. This practice of presence becomes the foundation for all other aspects of conscious living. When you're present, you can recognize your authentic feelings and desires more clearly. When you're present, you can make choices based on your actual values rather than unconscious programming. When you're present, you can respond to others with genuine attention rather than distracted politeness. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and profound observer of human psychology, introduced the concept of the shadow, the parts of ourselves that we've rejected, repressed, or tried to eliminate because they don't fit our idealized self-image or social expectations. Jung argued that genuine psychological health and authentic living require integrating these shadow aspects rather than continuing to deny or fight against them. This insight has profound implications for conscious living. Many people approach personal development with the unconscious goal of becoming a perfect version of themselves, always positive, never angry, completely confident, perpetually motivated, free from doubt or fear or selfish impulses. But this pursuit of psychological perfection often leads to increased self-rejection and internal conflict rather than greater authenticity and peace. The path of conscious living requires embracing your full humanity, including the aspects of yourself that you'd rather not acknowledge. This doesn't mean acting on every impulse or using self-acceptance as an excuse for harmful behavior. Instead, it means recognizing and accepting the full spectrum of human experience within yourself, while consciously choosing how to express and channel different aspects of your nature. For example, anger is often treated as a negative emotion to be eliminated or suppressed, but anger frequently contains important information about boundary violations, injustice, or situations that require protective action. Learning to feel and understand your anger without being controlled by it allows you to use this emotional energy constructively rather than either exploding inappropriately or imploding through suppression. Similarly, sadness, fear, doubt, and even selfish impulses all contain valuable information and energy when approached with consciousness rather than automatic rejection. Sadness connects you to what you value and have lost or might lose. Fear alerts you to potential dangers and can motivate appropriate caution. Doubt prevents premature certainty and encourages deeper investigation. Even selfishness, when examined consciously, can reveal important information about your authentic needs and boundaries. The practice of shadow integration involves developing what we might call curious self-compassion, the ability to observe all aspects of your inner experience with interest and kindness rather than immediate judgment and rejection. This doesn't mean indulging every feeling or impulse, but it does mean acknowledging their existence and trying to understand what they're attempting to communicate. When you stop spending so much energy fighting against parts of yourself, that energy becomes available for creative expression, authentic relationships, and meaningful contribution to the world. When you accept your full humanity, you can show up more genuinely in relationships because you're not constantly monitoring and editing your experience to maintain a perfect image. This integration also allows you to recognize and accept similar complexity in others. When you've made peace with your own difficult emotions and impulses, you become less likely to judge others harshly for their struggles and imperfections. This creates space for deeper, more authentic connections based on mutual acceptance rather than mutual performance of idealized versions of yourselves. Taking complete responsibility for your own experience represents perhaps the most challenging and most liberating aspect of conscious living. This goes far beyond accepting responsibility for your actions. It means recognizing that your internal experience, your emotional responses, and your interpretation of events are ultimately within your sphere of influence, regardless of external circumstances. This doesn't mean blaming yourself for everything that happens to you or denying the reality of external constraints, injustices, or genuinely difficult circumstances. It means recognizing the crucial difference between what happens to you and how you respond to what happens to you. Viktor Frankl called this the last of the human freedoms, the ability to choose your attitude in any given set of circumstances. Most people unconsciously give away this power by making their emotional well-being dependent on external factors beyond their control. They wait for others to change before they can be happy. They postpone contentment until circumstances become more favorable. They treat their own emotional states as automatic responses to external events rather than as choices they can influence through conscious awareness and practice. Self-responsibility, in the existential sense, means recognizing that while you can't control what happens to you, you always retain some degree of choice about how you interpret, respond to, and learn from whatever occurs. This shift from victimhood to agency, even in difficult circumstances, often represents the turning point between unconscious suffering and conscious growth. This doesn't happen overnight or through positive thinking alone. It requires developing what might be called response ability, the capacity to pause between stimulus and response long enough to choose your reaction rather than simply reacting automatically based on past conditioning or current emotions. For example, when someone criticizes your work, you can't control their opinion or their way of expressing it, but you can choose whether to interpret their feedback as a personal attack or as potentially useful information. You can choose whether to respond defensively or to listen for whatever might be valuable in their perspective. You can choose whether to let their opinion define your worth or to maintain your own sense of value while considering their input. This kind of self-responsibility extends to your relationship with your own thoughts and emotions. You can't control what thoughts arise in your mind or what emotions emerge in response to different situations, but you can choose how much attention to give different thoughts, and how to express emotions in constructive rather than destructive ways. The practice of self-responsibility doesn't make you immune to pain, disappointment, or genuine hardship. Instead, it ensures that you remain an active participant in your own life, rather than a passive victim of circumstances. It maintains your sense of personal power and creative potential, even in situations where your external options appear limited. Authentic living inevitably affects how you relate to others. When you begin living more consciously and authentically, your relationships naturally begin to shift. Some relationships deepen and become more meaningful as you bring more of your genuine self to the interaction. Others may become strained or even end as the foundation of mutual performance or unconscious patterns gets disrupted. Conscious relationship requires showing up as you actually are, rather than as who you think others want you to be. This includes sharing your authentic thoughts, feelings, and perspectives, even when they might create temporary discomfort or disagreement. It means setting boundaries based on your genuine needs and values, rather than what you think will maintain harmony at any cost. Many people discover that they've been participating in relationships based more on mutual accommodation and conflict avoidance than on genuine connection and authentic expression. While accommodation and compromise are certainly important elements of healthy relationships, when they become the primary foundation, relationships can become shallow performances rather than meaningful connections between real people. Conscious relationship also involves taking responsibility for your own emotional experience rather than making others responsible for managing your feelings or walking on eggshells to avoid triggering your sensitivities. This creates space for others to be authentic as well, since they don't have to constantly monitor and adjust their behavior to maintain your emotional stability. Perhaps most importantly, a conscious relationship requires accepting others as they actually are, rather than as projects to be improved or changed. This doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior or remaining in relationships that don't serve your growth and well-being. Instead, it means recognizing that you can only control your own choices and responses, not other people's decisions or personal development. When you approach relationships from this foundation of mutual authenticity and personal responsibility, conflicts become opportunities for deeper understanding rather than threats to be avoided. Differences of opinion become interesting rather than dangerous. Vulnerability becomes a source of connection rather than a risk to be minimized. The existentialist tradition offers no final answers, perfect formulas, or guaranteed outcomes. What it provides is something perhaps more valuable: the recognition that you are the author of your own existence, that your choices matter profoundly, and that your life has whatever meaning you create for it through conscious, authentic engagement with your circumstances and relationships. This recognition is simultaneously terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it removes all comfortable excuses and places full responsibility on your own shoulders. Liberating because it means you're not trapped by your past, your circumstances, or others' expectations. You can begin again right now with the very next choice you make. The question facing every human being isn't whether you'll encounter challenges, uncertainty, loss, or struggle. These are inevitable parts of human existence. The question is whether you'll face these realities consciously or unconsciously, authentically or inauthentically, with courage or with denial, with presence or with distraction. Your life is happening now, in this very moment, as you encounter these ideas and consider their relevance to your own experience. It's not waiting for better circumstances, clearer direction, greater confidence, or more certainty about outcomes. It's asking you to show up as you are, where you are, and begin the ongoing work of conscious existence. The philosophers we've explored, Sartre, Camus, Kierkegaard, Frankl, Nietzsche, and many others, they weren't superhuman or exempt from the struggles that characterize human existence. They were individuals who chose to live with their eyes open, who refused to sleepwalk through their brief time on Earth, who decided that consciousness, however uncomfortable, was preferable to unconsciousness. However comfortable, you have access to the same choice right now. Not someday when conditions become perfect or when you feel completely ready, but today in whatever imperfect circumstances currently surround you. The invitation is both simple and demanding. Wake up, choose consciously, live authentically, create meaning through your choices and responses, accept responsibility for your own experience, show up fully for your relationships, face uncertainty with courage rather than hiding behind false certainties. And when you inevitably fall back into unconscious patterns, when you catch yourself sleepwalking again, when you realize you've been avoiding difficult truths or necessary changes, simply begin again. Wake up again, choose consciousness again, return to authenticity again. This is the path of conscious living. It's not the easiest path available, but it's the only path that leads to a life you can look back on without fundamental regret, a life that was genuinely, authentically, courageously yours. The time for waiting, for preparing, for someday is over. The time for living consciously is now. This moment, this choice. This is the opportunity to show up fully for your one irreplaceable life. What will you choose?